Welcome to the southern colonies of the United Colonies of Great Britain. Now, at this time, we have already looked at our less genteel neighbors to the north, New England, Pennsylvania, and New York. Now we shall take a tour of Dixie, a trip through the old southern colonies of Great Britain. Let us begin. Virginia, named for the virgin wilderness. Now, the first colony of Virginia was at Roanoke Island off the coast of what is now Virginia. Now, what is most well known about the colony of Roanoke is that it mysteriously vanished not long after its establishment. What happened? So the very first colony at Roanoke was an utter failure. The settlement contained a little over 100 settlers, and after a year there, they couldn't take it and they left. A few years later, a second colony was established. Fortifications were built, and supplies was to be coming soon, but was delayed by warfare over in Europe. When these supply ships finally arrived at Roanoke, a most mysterious thing had occurred. The entire colony could be found utterly deserted. Not a single living soul could be found anywhere within the Roanoke settlement. Only one clue was left to suggest the fate of the colonists. The word Croatoan was etched into one of the palisades, the large tree trunks that had been formed into a spike and had been placed up as part of the wall of the settlement. Now, archaeologists, historians, and even a few climatologists have been somewhat stumped as to what happened to the Roanoke settlers. Now, everyone's first instinct at the time had been that the colonists must have been murdered by the natives. But the colony was otherwise undisturbed. It was empty, but not damaged sufficient with an invasion, nor have we ever found skeletal remains consistent with a battle or mass slaughter. So then people wondered about famine. Now, those who have felled trees on the island have noted among the rings of the trees, which show the growth of a tree, the inner rings. When you cut a tree down, you'll see the rings in the stump. The closer the rings are together, that represents periods when the tree did not experience much growth. This would seem to suggest a drought. It would appear that during the years when the colony vanished, there was a severe drought on the island of Roanoke. But this is all still speculation. However, whether by fair means or foul, the colony of Roanoke has utterly and completely disappeared. The second colony that British would attempt to found upon the shores of Virginia would be Jamestown. The Jamestown colony was more successful than Roanoke. That being said, the bar was pretty low, and Jamestown almost did not pass that bar. Now the English arrive as fortune hunters. You see, they think they're going to be like the conquistadors, the Spaniards who came to raid the Aztec Empire. They think they're going to come and find natives with cities of gold that they can pillage until they have enough wealth to be wealthy gentlemen back home in England. And then they'll sail back on the next ship home to be cheered on by their friends and relatives as successful heroes and fortune hunters. So they're gallivanting off trying to find treasure when they should have been building and planting. And by the time they realize their mistake, it is too late. Their crops are not mature by the time of the harvest season, leaving them in great distress. They barely survive the first winter, and the next spring a supply ship arrives. The men rush down to the supply ship, hoping that it will save them and take them home, but instead the ship has come laden with still more adventurers, new colonists. The captain does his best to reassure them, gives them some few basics of supplies, and bids them all farewell. The second winter is even worse. A starving time, they call it. There is not enough food to feed the settlement. Many of the fields in which they normally had hoped to plant it were awash with salt water from the sea that came into the swamp and poisoned the crops. There was at least one case a man turned to cannibalism in an attempt to survive. What ultimately saved the colony of Virginia is the same thing that ironically has been killing Virginians ever since: tobacco. Yes, as weird as that sounds, someone's life was actually saved by tobacco. And it was, in fact, the colony at Jamestown. See, the fortune that they eventually found was a fortune the natives had. The Native Americans quite often smoked tobacco, and eventually taught the Virginians how to grow it. Well, tobacco caught on like wildfire back in Europe, and soon Virginia grew rich, supplying a Europe that was freshly becoming addicted to tobacco. Maryland. Now, the great colony of Maryland was established by Lord Baltimore, a Catholic English nobleman and a friend of the king. He established the colony of Maryland as a refuge for English Catholics. Now, there were not many Catholics left in England after the years of persecution that had gone by as a result of the wars of religion, and he found his colony underpopulated. Undeterred, he opened it up to English Protestants as well, in the hopes of swelling the population. When he died, his son decided to institute popular sovereignty, that is to say, a certain degree of voting within the colony, in an effort to bring people into the colony. Now, this was not the first colony to have popular sovereignty. In fact, as we discussed earlier, New England had some popular sovereignty, and Virginia also did establish a legislature called the House of Burgesses. But here popular sovereignty went disastrously wrong, at least for the English Catholics, that is. The Protestant majority voted to outlaw Catholicism, forcing the Catholics, for whom Maryland had originally been designed as a haven, to flee to the Quakers in Pennsylvania in order to save their lives and property. Georgia, named after King George, as you might imagine, and it was founded as a debtors' colony. England, due to hard economic times, was awash with debtors and debtors' prison. See, back in the day, if you couldn't pay money, you ended up in debtors' prison. Now, debtors' prison was a terrible place to end up, as it were. You see, you ended up in prison because you couldn't pay your debts, and you would not be released from the prison until you paid your debts. You see where the problem emerges. Exactly how is a gentleman supposed to pay his debts if he cannot work? And he cannot work while he is incarcerated. This became a vicious cycle that caused many a good man to die in prison. Hoping to relieve the throngs of people held captive in debtors' prison, the king approved the formation of a colony, the southernmost of the English colonies, to serve as a fresh start for these poor souls who had ended up in debtors' prison. The Carolinas, they were founded by a joint stock company. Now, a joint stock company is a unique kind of venture similar to a modern corporation. See, individuals would invest portions of their wealth in the company and would own stock, shares of the company. This was handy, especially for expeditions of the period, because if the expedition ended up being a complete and utter failure, you didn't lose all of your money as if you had backed the expedition yourself. Now, both of the Carolinas were named after King Charles I, or Carolus Rex in the Latin. So how is it that these southern colonies made their money? Well, in the south they grew crops, cash crops. These aren't the kind of crops you can eat, these are the kind of crops you can sell. There were four main crops that quickly became the centers of the southern economy: indigo, rice, tobacco, and cotton. Now, cotton was actually the least successful of them at this period. This has to do largely... Cotton was not the most successful of the crops, and I'll explain precisely why. Now, you see, cotton came in two varieties: short staple and long staple. And what this refers to is the length of the little strands of cotton fiber relative to how many seeds were found inside the plant. Now, what's valuable about a cotton plant are the fibers, but you can't weave the fibers into thread unless you remove the seeds, you see. Now, long staple cotton has very few seeds and long strands, and it's easy to comb the seeds out of it. The problem with that is that long staple cotton only grows on a few islands off the coast. Now, short staple cotton can be grown just about anywhere in the South, but there's a problem with that. It takes hours upon hours of back-breaking labor to remove those seeds. Even with unpaid labor, whether indentured servants or slaves, it still was not feasible to plant a terribly large crop of short staple cotton and still turn a profit. The big sellers at this point were indigo, which was used to make purple and blue dye, rice, and tobacco. Now, because the South spent most of its time and energy on these cash crops and a plantation economy, they became dependent upon England and other colonies for food and manufactured goods. It also meant they had a reliance on unpaid labor in order to make these plantations affordable. So the first initial source of this unpaid labor are indentured servants. Now, what is an indentured servant, you might ask? Well, lots of folks, poor folks in Europe, particularly England, wanted to head over to the Americas in hopes of founding a better life for themselves. So what happened in an indentured servant's practice is if you wanted to get over, but you didn't have the money to pay for the passage, to pay for a ship to take you over, the way it worked is that these companies would say, well, here's what we'll do for you. We will pay for your passage. We'll put the money up front so that you can get across the Atlantic to America. And what we will do then is we will set you up with someone who will pay us, and you're going to work for them for a period of 5 years. No pay. Those 5 years you're going to work for them. They'll give you food and lodging, and when you're done, they're supposed to set you up with a small plot of land for you to work yourself. Sounds like a pretty good deal. And a lot of young men and women were eager to jump on board. Many of the poor young women ended up being sold off pretty much as brides to the eager men over in Virginia and the other colonies. Now, the problem is the system was very easy to abuse because of one very simple thing. A servant only got the land if he did the full period of service. If he died before that was completed, then whoever had purchased his services was not required to hand over any land to anyone, which was very easy. So many of these young adolescents, these young people, men about your age or younger, took up these offers and ended up dying on the shores of the Americas, often starved to death under terrible working conditions. Now, first, most of them were poor Englishmen. Later, German and Swiss families would come. Now, conditions were often so horrid that many of the servants fled to live among the Native Americans. So, as options became better in other colonies, particularly I mentioned William Penn giving away or selling off land at a very affordable price. As this occurred, fewer and fewer people wanted to be indentured servants. And as a result, the South turned to a much harsher and crueler source of unpaid labor.